Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. Conrad is a writer that I read a lot when I was 19 and I was getting seriously into literature, and I realized that unlike many of the people I started doing my BA, my undergraduate degree in Milan with, I didn't really have a knowledge of many classic writers. The people I studied with during my first year had grown up reading classic literature from the 19th century, reading Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters, and Conrad himself, and Kerouac, and Steinbeck, and I decided to try and get myself an education, and I explored the works of some of these writers and fell in love with several of those. John Steinbeck would be an example, Jules Verne would be another, H.G. Wells, Conrad himself, Agatha Christie. I read so many works by these writers. I think I probably read 6-7 novels by Conrad at the time, but then for whatever reason, probably because I moved to other writers, I started exploring some other areas of recent and classic literature. I focused especially my attention on contemporary American fiction. I kind of stopped reading them. Recently I found a copy of The Secret Agent on sale at a local library, and I decided to give Conrad another try and see what I think about him now that I have a few years of experience under my belt, and most notably now that I read in English. When I read Conrad at 19, I still read most of my books in Italian in translation. Conrad, in fact, is one of those writers that stands at that weird conjunction between the 19th and the 20th century in literary terms, even more than in actual chronological terms. Just as people like Marcel Proust, just like Thomas Hardy, he writes at that intersection between the realist novel and the tradition of the 19th century and the low modernism that would evolve in the 1910s and 1920s, most notably in the big stream of consciousness, high modernist novels by Woolf and Joyce and those nice people. What this means to the reader is that you find a balance between a commitment to telling an engaging story about interesting characters, remarkable characters, interacting with the flow of history, interacting with their society, and being either swept away by it, swept away by the world they find themselves living in, or changing it, often in tragic ways. But at the same time, the focus is not only on the individual within society, which was, again, one of the great themes of the 19th century, the individual in history. Think of the great historical novel, think of Middlemarch by George Eliot. You also find a very strong focus on the psychological lives of Conrad's characters, on how they react to whatever happens to them, to the processes that go through their heads as they interact with the world, as they interact with people. What that means is that every conversation in The Secret Agent, and generally speaking in these kind of low modernist novels, often tends to drag on and to be explored from every possible side. It's the point of the novel is not so much to push the action forward and to move the plot along and give the reader thrills, even though this is a novel with explosions in it and secret plots. And there actually is a pretty thrilling and pretty gruesome plot underneath it all. The focus is on exploring the mechanics of human interactions and the way we as human beings work, maybe the darker, less discussed sides of our psyche and of our thought processes, the way people can think of themselves as upstanding citizens just trying to get on and win a living for themselves and their families, while still behaving horribly with one another. The way people are sometimes pushed in corners that move them to commit awful crimes and terrible things. This sounds like really heavy and boring stuff, I recognize that, but it really shouldn't be. It's basically a truism about literature, that it inquires and wonders about how we as humans experience the world. It's an exploration of this puzzling existence we all lead, with all its mysteries and its ambiguities and contradictions. The point is that the great writers, when they explore these kind of contradictions, when they focus and zoom in deeper and deeper on a single element, a single moment in a person's life, a fateful conversation, a chance encounter, even when they take chapters upon chapters to deal with these kinds of scenarios, with these brief scenes, even when they slow down the rhythm and they turn it eternal, they still manage to be engaging. The greatest example that comes to my mind would be Philip Roth's. In novels such as The American Pastoral, you sometimes get chapters, or The Human Stain would be another example, you get chapters that deal with a single fateful conversation, with a single event, a single moment in a person's life, and take up so many pages, but look at this event from so many different perspectives and turn this event, study it from all possible sides, that they feel rewarding and stimulating and make you think at your own life, make you consider these fictional characters' dilemmas and conundrums from all sorts of perspectives in a very engaging way. The Secret Agent, if I have to be honest, felt a bit too heavy when it came to dissecting and exploring the dynamics of human interaction. And if I gave you that nice historical introduction about Conrad writing between these different moments in literary history, it's because I believe that you are going to have much more fun with The Secret Agent if you read it as a historical document up to a point, which is something, well, it sounds almost like an insult. No novel should be appreciated just because it's important historically. What is that crap? It should be appreciated because it's stimulating and fun and entertaining, and the character's plight is relevant to you, and it's stimulating, and it gives you pleasure, generally speaking. And there is some of that to be had in Secret Agent, but if you are able to notice and to understand how innovative some of the turns of phrases used by Conrad, how very modern the way he focused on the psyche of his characters, some of the perspectives he used in his third-person narration, how very new all of this was, you are going to be able to stand the boring, slow-moving chapters so much better. As with any piece of literature worth its salt, you really have to pay close attention to appreciate the nuances of Conrad's language, to understand how a certain word might go a long way toward altering the portrait that Conrad has been drawing of a certain character, maybe giving you a different side of his personality, showing him as less selfless or transparent than you expected. For instance, at one point the narrator describes Chief Inspector Heat as he reflects and reminisces about the old bosses he worked for, these old police officers, and he goes, the second boss Inspector Heat worked for was a perfect gentleman, knowing his own and everybody else's place to a nicety. On resigning to take up a higher appointment out of England, got decorated for, really, Inspector Heat's services. And that really, between parentheses in the text, goes a long way toward telling you, toward revealing that sure, Inspector Heat considers this old boss an upstanding guy and a honorable policeman, but at the same time, that decoration that he won was really whole Inspector Heat's own merit. It was all his work. What I just read, by the way, is called free indirect speech. We have a third-person narrator talking about and presenting a character's thoughts, and at one point it becomes problematic / slightly difficult to understand whether an opinion that's being expressed belongs to the supposedly omniscient third-person narrator or to the character themselves, whether the narrative has been influenced by the thoughts of the character, whether the camera eye that's being moving around the pages of this novel has actually moved inside the mind and the point of view of the character themselves. And that, in case you don't know, is the most modern shit imaginable. It's the central thing, the central element that made modernism so much different from anything that came before before, and it has all sorts of implications for the evolution of human thought, for the evolution of the way we think about our experiences and our role into the world. And it implies something that was largely alien to the 19th century realist novel. The idea that you cannot really portray or offer a clear, well-rounded portrait, even just of a character's life, because because the nature of thought is so convoluted and depends so much, our experiences depend so much on point of view, that like representing this array of perspectives becomes almost a paradox, almost a contradiction. This is expressed in Cubism through through painting, say, through visual props. It's expressed in literature through these kinds of contradictions and ambiguities, by mixing up the narrator with the character, by showing how the character's perspectives alters the very flow of narration and the very way the events are presented, arguing for how it's impossible to present the events from a really external perspective, but you can only filter them through a specific individual point of view. I talked a lot about history, but I do firmly believe that it's somehow perverted to read novels as historical documents or to learn about the evolution of a certain literary concept or device, and that novels are to be appreciated as good stories. In terms of being a good story, The Secret Agent, I found, was much stronger in its second half. The first half of the novel jumps a little bit too frequently between different characters, and just as soon as you're getting passionate and interested in the life of a single character, maybe this very lazy anarchist, supposed anarchist, of a protagonist, the novel jumps to someone else that is not quite as interesting. The second half was much more cohesive and also included a few unexpected twists. The second, I guess the main twist of the novel revolves around a pretty tragic event, the death of a character. I really hope it wasn't supposed to be a surprise twist. Something happens where basically you know that someone has died, but you don't really find out who that person really is until very late into the novel. I really hope Conrad wasn't expecting the revelation to be a surprise, because it was clear all along who the dead person was going to be. Who knows? And finally, the novel talks about anarchism and terrorism, and especially about the police and the state more broadly speaking, and asks some very interesting questions about whether the power wielded by these institutions, by the state, by the police, might be inevitably in contradiction with their supposedly noble nature. But I believe that the novel lacks a very clear and unitary point to make on these topics, which is not necessarily something bad. As I said in the course of the video, literature is about highlighting the ambiguities of life. It's not like I expect novels to make certain points or to offer solutions to the problems of the world. We're not talking about politics, this is fiction. I do believe, though, that there is such a thing as lacking a point to unfold. You know, we all know that certain topics are complicated. It's trying to show how complicated they are in a way that makes them clearer rather than blurrier. That's difficult, and that has an artistry around it. All of that is to say that this might not be the place to go if you're interested in a novel about anarchy as a political stance. Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon would be my personal suggestion, but that's also because it's kind of my favorite novel of all times, possibly at least. Secret Agent, I'm glad I read it. I didn't really have fun in the literal sense of the word, but it was definitely an interesting experience from a historical perspective, and there were some rewarding moments in the course of the novel. I'm glad I experienced the lives of some of these characters. It's really hard for me to compare it to my other Conrads, because as I mentioned, I read them almost 10 years ago now. but I would probably put it somewhere in my low top 5 if I were to write a top 5 Conrad novels these days. But that would be very stupid. What are your favorite Conrad novels? Hopefully you've read them more recently than the early 10s. Let me know in the comments below, and let me know what you think about the Secret Agent, about the stuff I've told about in the video. And thank you as always for watching the review, guys. Bye, guys.